President.
A lot of people. We have, well, there's whatever. Well, because that's. Yeah. And it's always somebody sweat that.
I don't have a business card, but
Yeah, there's, but I mean, if they were coming out more, but if it's one place,
so we're looking on different places.
they want a large group,
It could be a big event.
so it would be, our best to have. All over coming and bringing results.
But I don't know.
It's in their state, yeah. The day just keeps getting better and better.
I could eat my snack now. Yeah, it was just good.
Yes, and lots of things are happening. It's wonderful.
Chicago.
You too. Kathy and I went to a meeting at the Emergency Regional Planning Office. And that's another thing.
How are you?
They would tell it as sustainability, it's environmental. And then just the border is that it started as a sustainability commission. Their council was passed. Jenny is there. So, yeah, so I mean,
I'm seeing, and then I'm looking for like public comment or previous programs and also those are good. My name is Daphne.
And so the mantra was, what are you gonna do?
so if we're thinking regionally, then Kathy said needs to be in a conversation. She is, she's a Belgrade resident who runs the website, NWI Region Resilience. And she was really instrumental in helping us get the greenhouse gas emissions regional.
Oh, yes.
She's the charter at Deanna, and she's the But she was a very
Kevin, you got the presentation and everything?
and she's trying to get the umbrella together under Northwest Indiana Beach and Resilience. So she is trying to connect everybody together.
I don't think Alan thought about that.
So we just saw her this morning. She
I think we're gonna.
Is there a way that we can get it posted online? Okay. Yeah, if you want to, and we can have our adjuster script so she can. Trade a slides. You go through the presentation.
But I'll just say, I said, bring this in. She was having a question online. Or they are.
Once we start meeting, we'll be online.
Shall I go with that?
Yes, is the owl going to be showing a picture of the meeting location, like our presentation here?
It will try to a little bit, but it's gonna be pretty small.
Touch and go. We'll just make sure folks know that the presentation is posted online.
Well, it'd be a little bit of a yeah, that's right. You want to have this.
This is Lynn.
Yes, hi, nice to meet you. At the same time, yes, yes.
Susan Duncan. This is Susan Duncan. Susan was just telling us about I think exactly. It's like, I guess. I got a white hair.
I heard that. She said you know where they are. Can everyone hear me? Yeah, not in the back. I think we're going to go ahead and get started this evening. I'll start off with a few technical notes. Most important is that I heard there was a BP meeting, was originally scheduled for this evening. So I hope everyone is here to talk climate action. If not, you'll get a great introduction to climate action in Indiana. We're really excited to be kicking off the 5th of the public meetings dedicated to the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program. It's a really exciting opportunity for the state. So a few logistical notes, as I mentioned, we are live streaming the event. So I just ask that everyone in the room try to keep any side conversations and noise to a minimum. It helps those joining online to hear better. Our microphones are very, very sensitive. The recording will be posted online after the event, so you'll be able to jump in if there's anything you missed. We will go kind of quickly do the limited time. So that'll be there for your reference. And the slides have already been posted online, so those will be there for your reference as well on IDEM's website. So everything available to you and more after this event. The next note is that with the limited time we have, I usually have to leave by 7:30 this evening. So I just ask that everyone help us stay on topic so we can make the most of this time together tonight and be respectful of our hosts. So with that being said, I'd like to start with a few introductions. First, noting that I'm joined here tonight by members of Indiana's Department of Environmental Management, who are the grant recipients, so really appreciate them bringing this opportunity to the state. I'll also introduce members of our facilitation team. So I'm Amanda Mast. I'm a senior manager with Climco, and we are a decarbonization advisory firm, supporting both on the technical analyses associated with this grant and getting to enjoy evenings like this in public meetings with you all. I'm joined by my colleagues Noah and Jacqueline, who's helping us sign in, but will also be helping us with the question and answer period. So appreciate everyone being here. With that being said, I think we'll go through some of the goals for this evening. So again, this meeting is designed to pick up where public meeting 4 left off. So really showing progress since that time. At the same time, if you're just jumping into this planning process now, have less of a background on it, please do visit the IDEM website. They've got a hub dedicated solely to the CPRG program with tons of resources to help you get caught up. I will, however, begin with a quick refresher on the grant program, just to remind us of all of this opportunity. I'll then focus the majority of the time outlining the measures that were selected for the PCAP and some of the initial results of our technical analyses. And then finally, I'll give an overview of what this priority climate action plan will draft include, so everyone knows what's coming before wrapping it up with next steps and opening up the floor to comments and questions. That's our goal. I think we can achieve it in a quick amount of time, so bear with me tonight. So that refresher of the grant to start. The Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program was launched by the Environmental Protection Agency to help address climate pollution throughout the country. It's a 2-phase program. The first portion of this grant program is focused on the planning grants that we've been working on for the last few months. These are designed to help states fund the creation of climate action plans, ideally reducing pollution, supporting communities, creating jobs, and is one of these grants is what Indiana has already received. The second phase of the grant process is focused on the implementation grants, an additional $4.6 billion in federal funds that the EPA will award competitively so that the actions in these plans can get realized. The Indiana Department of Environmental Management is planning on applying for one of these grants on behalf of Indiana with support of projects that stakeholders across the state have been submitting. And so I'll share a little bit more on that a little later, but wanted to set this out again, 2 parts of the grant program. We're mostly focused on the planning grant right now. Moving on to the timeline. So this lays out the major work streams that we've seen over the past few months. So a lot of progress and a really short amount of time to hit some really robust deadlines from the EPA. So the top row, it might be hard to see. I'll walk you through it verbally, don't worry. The top row is focused just on that planning grant timing. You can see the majority of our work has been spent in stakeholder engagement, trying to hear from Hoosiers throughout the state on what they want to see in terms of climate action to identify really key measures to include in the plan. After they were identified, we jumped into the technical analyses required by the grant program. And then finally getting to rapidly draft the plan over the past few weeks, ideally to have a draft to post mid-February before we wrap and deliver back to the EPA by March 1st. So really, really fast 5-month timeline. At the same time, you'll see at the very end, comprehensive planning begins. So this is just phase 1 of the planning program. We get to build on this foundation with more input from stakeholders, with more detailed analyses, and that will be starting later this year. So if you're just getting processed right now, don't worry, there's plenty of opportunity to participate, and we really invite you to do so. So that's just phase 1. Phase 2 implementation grant is that bottom row. And this kicked off in December when IDEM invited stakeholders throughout the state to submit projects to reduce emissions for consideration in the application for that additional pool of funding. IDEM is currently reviewing a number of applications. Over 100 have been submitted, and the very competitive ones that we think can compete against other states, will be submitted back to the EPA by April. So a lot coming very, very quickly. And again, all these details, including the slides and these timelines, are already posted on IDEM's website. So if you need a minute to understand, what's happening and what's coming, definitely invite you to take your time and visit the website for more detail. So next few slides, we'll move from logistics to get a little more detail on each of the tasks that we've been working on over the past few months. So the main focus of our work has been to select the measures to reduce climate pollution and emissions throughout the state through a 3-step process. So the first step in this process was to do an initial screening of national best practices, the local, state, company level as well, that could create meaningful reductions. After that process began the stakeholder engagement period this fall, featuring public meetings similar to these, multiple surveys, interviews, as well as feedback submitted via email. And through this, we were able to hear what measures mattered most to people, what were their priorities, what benefits these could bring that could really resonate with communities. Thanks to that input, we were able to refine the measures to ideally ones that resonate better, and do a final check, that third step, to see how these align with local and municipal climate action plans, as those plans represent the efforts of stakeholders throughout the state as well, who've invested a lot of time in planning and thinking about climate action in Indiana. So through that process, don't mind moving on to the next slide now. More than 1,500 Hoosiers participated. We knew it was a rapid timeline and really appreciated the outpouring of support. In particular, this initiative focused on low-income and disadvantaged communities in the planning process. So we're really appreciative to see that survey respondents alone, more than 20%, came from these priority areas. And also really appreciated those community representatives who reached out either through public meetings or through separate interviews to share what mattered most to them and the people that they spoke on behalf of. So really hope that that's something that can continue and even grow through the comprehensive planning process. And it's very small, so I'll share more detail to you verbally, but the center of the screen is focused on the most important question asked in the survey, which is, what are your top climate actions that can benefit you, your communities? Through this process, 3 rose to the top, including renewable energy, energy efficiency efforts, as well as improvements to public transit. And I'm really happy to say that all 3 of those measures, of course, are included in the priority measures for the Climate Action Plan. So we can move on to those measures next. On the screen, you can see a summary of the 10 measures that will go into the priority plan. At the same time, we'll be able to expand upon these measures through, again, that comprehensive planning effort that'll start later this year. All these measures are shared in detail on the website, even with the methodology, summary, so available to you for deeper reading. But there are some things I would like to highlight for you live while we're here together. The first is that we added a new measure to focus on rooftop solar and community solar in particular, due to really overwhelming support from stakeholders that we've heard from. Second is the addition of a measure to expand green spaces, especially in urban areas. That was something that a lot of communities spoke out and said, hey, this could really benefit us, brings resilience, it improves air quality, it makes the area one we would enjoy living in more. So that was in a measure we were excited to include as well. And then the last thing I'll highlight for you is that the measure to reduce vehicle miles traveled is really very broad. It focuses both on improving public transportation, expanding access, as well as efforts to improve active transport. So this could be bike pathways, pedestrian walkways, other forms of transportation that can help connect communities. So again, full measures available online for you to read through in detail. Would love for you to do so. For the next slide though, again, keeping us moving on a tight timeline this evening. After these measures were selected through the stakeholder engagement process, we then had to jump into the technical analyses, of which there were many required by the EPA to meet the requirements of the grant. And at the same time, these were exciting to pursue as well because they showed some of the potential and the benefits of the measures that stakeholders had selected and really what impact they could create in communities. Ideally, fingers crossed, making the application from Indiana more competitive when submitted back to the EPA. No, if you wouldn't mind going to the next one. So the foremost of these technical analyses was an effort to model out and estimate the potential emissions reductions that would come from these initiatives. So for example, we estimated that more than 2.7 million metric tons of emissions could be avoided every year in Indiana, simply through measures to reduce vehicle miles traveled. Even more impactful, more than 15 million metric tons of emissions could be reduced through efforts to enhance renewable energy generation in the state every year. So again, these are significant measures with significant impact that can not only drive down emissions, but ideally contribute to preventing some of the worst impacts of a changing climate, which really affect all communities in the state and the country as well. But these aren't the only benefits of these measures. Through speaking with communities, we were able to prioritize 7 additional benefits to research through a benefits analysis, which included reviews of studies throughout the state, as well as national studies showing the impacts of some of these climate efforts. What we found were significant potential for job creation, especially when measures were combined with workforce training as well. Second, significant impact is improvement to local air quality through these measures, which can have significant impacts on human health and public health, and are very exciting to see. And then last, are improvements and reductions in the cost of renewable energy and just general energy costs, which can really be helpful for households that spend a disproportionate amount of their income on energy already. So again, very exciting benefits to see, and hopefully we can see some of these coming to Indiana. So I want to say is all of this information included in these slides and more will be included in the draft priority climate action plan that we've been working on. While it will be published later this month, I do want to highlight the outline while we're all here together today, so everybody knows what's coming and what to expect. The first chapter of the PCAP will focus on an introduction to the current state in Indiana, including Indiana's emissions footprint, as well as an analysis of low-income and disadvantaged communities as defined by federal tools, to highlight some of the communities who could really benefit from some meaningful action. The second section is focused on how the PCAP is developed. So there'll be rigorous documentation of the processes I just ran through, including that 3-step process to identify measures through the national screening of best practices, the stakeholder engagement and information collection, and finally through that review and alignment to local climate action plans. And then the last chapter, the majority of the report, will be dedicated to the measures themselves. So outlining what they are, what the current state of them, their current state is in Indiana, and also highlighting those exciting emissions reductions potential that we could see if these projects get implemented. So again, very excited. We're currently at 100 pages and very excited to share that very soon with everyone here. All the slides I just went through are focused on that planning grant, But remember, there's that second phase, that implementation grant phase occurring as well. So I'm excited to dedicate one slide to that today. This is focused on that project proposal, request for project proposals that IDEM released in December. More than 100 project proposals have been received for projects that reduce emissions throughout the state. And what we've captured on the screen in detail here are the many projects that have already been submitted that could potentially impact Northwest Indiana and bring some benefits here. So some of these projects come from nonprofits, from municipalities, from companies, and they focus on a range of initiatives from renewable energy, particularly solar development, driving energy efficiency, increasing access to electric vehicles, as well as reducing vehicle miles traveled. So a really broad suite of measures that could be implemented. As I mentioned, IDEM is currently reviewing those more than 100 project proposals and will include the most competitive ones in an application to ideally bring additional funds to the state. So fingers crossed. Last slide. So a few next steps. As I mentioned already, we're really excited to be wrapping up drafting of the Priority Climate Action Plan, to be sharing that mid-month with you before it needs to be finalized and submitted back to the EPA. Next comes that rapid application for the implementation grant, due 1st in April. And then finally, a reminder that this is not the end of the process, but more the beginning. We'll be able to expand upon this with comprehensive action plan and comprehensive action planning beginning later this year. So please, 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 please stay engaged. Help us make this a meaningful effort for all Hoosiers. So we have a number of ways to support you staying engaged and working with us on this. The first box is that information hub I've been speaking about. There's also postings around the room if this is really small to scan or see on your screen, but it's on IDEM's website, solely developed to this climate pollution reduction grant program. And in particular, it has a place where you can add your email to join the listserv so that you'll get notifications every time there's an update, every time there's a request for information. You don't have to be stalking the website fully, but instead can receive updates so you can stay on board and up to date with what's happening. Second box highlights an email address that's open all the time, as well as a phone number. If you have questions or are curious about opportunities to participate or have ideas to bring to us, so please feel free to reach out. Those are there for you. And then finally, one last plug that the draft plan is coming very, very soon, and we're very excited to share it. So, with that being said, very, very quickly, I wanted to leave a good amount of time this evening to answer questions as we have some time to discuss live. And I'd like to invite my colleague Jacqueline up, who will help us coordinate this question period.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jacqueline Sanders, and I work alongside Amanda and Noah. So we are going to get into the open and public comment section of this presentation, but I do want to just kind of go over some reminders. So the first thing is that in order to make sure that we utilize this time as efficiently as possible and making sure that we focus on this important new grant program, is that we focus solely on this. I know there may be some other things that we want to discuss, and we do have not only a form that you can fill out, but we also can put up the email address for to make sure that we get it over to the right team member to address. The other thing is that we only have the room until 7:30, so we are going to limit comments and questions to about 3 minutes. I'll raise my hand once we hit about 30 seconds before that time runs out. And so just kind of be on the lookout for that. And then the other, one of the final things I'll say is that if you don't get a chance to submit your question verbally, we do have options for you to write it down, whether you email it, written, speak it, it's all taken under the same consideration. So just know that there's a lot of avenues to get your concerns and feedback through to us. And then the most important thing, I think, is just always remembering to show kindness and respect while each other is speaking. And that is pretty much all. So we can kind of jump into it. Who wants to go ahead and get us started with comments? Okay. If you don't mind, let me explain this too. If you don't mind just coming to the middle right here, and then that way.
Mine is just a question.
Questions? Yeah, questions.
You know about what percentage of those roughly 100 applications will IDEM be including in your application?
I might defer to the IDEM team on this one. So
Yeah, that is a question we do not have an answer yet to. The reason is that we continue to receive applications in the second part of the application process. The deadline for that isn't until February 15th. So we anticipate continuing to receive applications through that deadline. So we yet don't know what the total of the applications is, and we also don't know exactly. There are different tiers that you can compete within EPA's program, and we're learning more in communicating with other states on which tier we want to compete in. They range anywhere from up to 200,000 or up to 200 million, all the way up to 500 million.
Thank you.
Certainly.
So I have a few questions that kind of build on this. So I hear you mention several times, that you in particular are trying to make sure disadvantaged communities have opportunities here. And so I'm kind of wondering, in terms of your process, what are you doing to make sure those communities are getting the support they need to actually submit these proposals? How are you working with local, and in particular, Northwest Indiana city administrations? I know we have a pretty new one, so I don't even know where this is on their radar, but how are you working with our communities to make sure that we are competitive in this process?
So great question. I think it's easiest to say first that one of the best ways we've been participating in communities is through working with municipalities. The Gary Climate Action Plan was one of the ones that was considered for alignment. It was very robust, very exciting to see. So, and have been having multiple interviews with representatives from Gary as well. So that first, working with representatives is one way, but also through members of the community who have identified themselves or been identified by others for their actions on climate action for their community support. So those community representatives who've reached out to us or been identified, we've been having additional interviews with them to hear about their preferences and also their recommendations going forward. So it's been a mix, and I think one of the benefits is that we can keep building on it in the future. So really, if you know stellar members of the community who you think we should be speaking with, probably hearing from them, would love to hear from them. And you have our commitment to keep working with municipalities and local governments as well, who've been investing a lot, who have more local connections, and who've been building climate action plans for some time.
Yes, how you doing? I just want the committee, if they could consider Northwest Indiana a priority for the state. When I look at the map, as far as where's your problem, it's Northwest Indiana. That's where most of your, well, not real clean air. And a lot of data, I've been doing research. Lung Association has data. Chicago, number 8 in the world. And Gary's right here next to Chicago. Everybody knows that. It's kind of like New York and Newark when I was used to live in that area years ago. And I'm here in Gary now. But I think a couple of priorities. One, I see the trucking hub. Serious. That's going to make a dent there. So it's doing a couple of things. One is just if you've got empty loads coming in, coming out, it's additional trips going in. There needs to be some type of regulation on that. That could be an easy project to knock down your, clean air, because you got trucks coming in fully loaded, then you got them going out empty, and they're just hanging around Gary, hanging around Northwest Indiana. They don't do that in Kokomo, where I used to live at. They don't do that in other little cities. but it's just a lot of trucking hub, but we gotta talk to the private people with some kind of project maybe. It's a kind of a no money, more private investors. The other area that is some of the schools, and I know there's a code, Indiana 2133-16, that is in the Indiana code to take care of schools for clean air, energy, and all that. Need capital investment. Particularly in this area, we got some pretty good schools, except we got one sitting in the middle of the city, Gary and Roosevelt. It could be done with the Clean Air Act, get all the boilers, all that stuff cleaned up, where the community can use it functionally. And there's money there. This money could be used to help that area. The other area is street lighting, and I look at that as more security. Every city I've been in, Lafayette, other areas in the state of Indiana, every street light works, 100%. Why? Because they're using solar. They're using solar to light the city, and it's an easy project. It's a no-brainer. You change out all these lights here, I know there's a rate of return. So I'm just asking this committee to look at it. I've only got about 30 seconds left. Gardening, our people need to have some incentive to go into some gardening and doing things at their homes and stuff to feed their families and stuff. There's a lot of open land in the Gary area and urban areas. I've seen it. Rooftops, you can do it, a lot of other things. And then there was only two quick ones. There should be some kind of allowance. A lot of the elderly ones that work at steel mills here and there, I kind of stay with he turned 90 actually, January, my father-in-law. The heater and air conditioning, all that stuff, rusted out, holes in it, all that. They blow their, I know it's all over the neighborhood because they're living on these incomes, and maybe there can be a incentive that you give them $5,000, I want you all to get new furnaces. I mean, that would help the community and individuals, especially like elderly, to kind of, that's part of the climate change because this gas is going out. And so I just want to wrap it up that I think you're doing a great job. This is a positive meeting. I don't want you to spend too much money on analysis paralysis. I've been in project capital management. You can spend all your money researching the plan, but common sense, you can see your maps. You guys have been doing a great job telling where the problem's at, because I see it when I look at your website. So we need to spend some of that money right now on some of these quick, I call them low-hanging fruit and quick fixes. And the people really need that. And then last one is roofs. A lot of roofs, I go around, drive around, are caving in. Why can't you get an allowance to get solar? These solar panels are very light. I put them on a hotel in Hyatt. They took a tennis court away, that hotel had a reduction of 30% in their utility bill. What if every citizen in Northwest Indiana got 30% off their utility bill? I bet they would go put those panels up. So I'm done.
Thank you.
That's all I wanted to say. Thank you. Bruce Curry.
Bruce Curry, thank you very much.
Excellent points. Excellent.
Bruce, just want to say in response, love the ideas for projects. I think you had two questions in there. One was, how is Northwest Indiana being considered? Just want to highlight that, we're getting the project submissions in and they're being reviewed. And one of the criteria is, are they helping communities? And how are they helping communities where they need it most? So absolutely something that's top of mind. And then second, saying, they appreciate all the ideas for projects, would love to see them, just need them coming in. So thank you so much.
Good evening. Thank you for coming. I'm attorney Tracy Coleman. I'm a resident of Gary, Indiana, also a former park ranger. So I'm very thankful for the attention that's being given to the environment. I have a couple of areas that I've also typed up my comments and I provided them to you. But looking at the children and the environment here, I always start off, Gary has 56 parks. Our children they do not have one working public swimming pool. And they're near Lake Michigan. So there's a lot of environmental concerns with our children. And so even starting off with the climate change, I think it's going to be very crucial that we educate the next generation, because we want to make sure it's sustainable 100 years, 200 years, so our children and grandchildren will have a safe environment. A lot of our high schools, with the Gary Community School Corporation, they're near nature preserves, like Westside Leadership Academy is within walking distance of a nature preserve. If we look at our recent park plan, they omitted like 22 parks. So it's gonna be crucial that it's not an afterthought on when we talk about expanding green spaces. It's also important that we take care of what we have. And that's where to have a park plan where people look at 22 parks as insignificant it shows some of the disconnect here. That you have all this valuable land, you have 56 parks, you have a golf course, Gleason Park, which is inoperable. And a lot of times people use the golf courses to deal with flooding issues and things like that. But the fact that we have a community that we're not recognizing the assets or taking care of them is part of the problem. And then, so I think part of the plan should go into the studies and what can be done when we deal with all these natural habitats and areas to make sure that we're good stewards of them. And also with the landfills. Near West Side, off of 25th and Burr, there's a former landfill. We look at Hammond, we look at Portage, and these communities have taken their former landfills and restored them and repurposed them. Munster, they have Centennial Park, Hammond has Lost Marsh, but we don't have those items here. So I've typed up my comments, I've given them to you, but hopefully this is the beginning of a beautiful relationship so that we can see positive change in our environment. Thank you.
I don't need a microphone. So one of the big projects that we have coming in Northwest Indiana is the hydrogen hub, right, with BP. And there are a couple of different processes to create hydrogen. Some of them are going to produce CO2 that they're going to try and recapture. Obviously, the best process would be green hydrogen, which is created from renewable energies. There is already a plan to start with gray, which is created by gray hydrogen, which is created by coal, or blue hydrogen, which is created by natural gas. The blue hydrogen process will then try and recapture the CO2 and pump it 100 miles away down to Benton County and pump it 7,000 feet into the ground, right? We're sitting tonight in almost an environmental disaster outside with BP just flaring up because of a power outage. And we're going to create a process that still creates a byproduct that is poisonous. When we do have the option of going straight to green energy, 80, 90 miles away from here, we have a wind farm that NIPSCO owns, which could be the energy source to create that green energy. I would really hope that IDEM takes into high consideration, any project that wants to go directly to green energy, green hydrogen, and skip right over the process of black, gray, or blue, which is still going to produce CO2.
Hello. I only have two questions in light of what you just said. Benzene and the hydrous sulfide leak in BP and the impact of several communities in Indiana and Illinois. So the first question is, are there any provisions for the grant that improves communications to residents in environmental justice communities where industrial spills are regularly occurrence? And then the second question is, are there any preventions for the grant to include air monitoring for fence line in communities to access data and on air toxic in real time?
Both are great questions. I think the first thing I want to note is that the focus of these programs is more on climate pollution, like greenhouse gas reduction, so less on sort of the air monitoring that you're asking for in our initial plan. So those are really important projects. I hope you keep highlighting them, just a little outside of the purview of what we can ask for from the EPA at this time. Thank you for highlighting both of those important issues. I appreciate you.
One thing I might add,
Oh, thank
Amanda, is that Barry Sneed, who's with us here today too, is from our Media and Communication Services Division. And after the meeting, Barry, Susan, or I can help identify who the resources are that can help you get access to the information that you need for when there are spills and other types of releases. Okay.
Anyone else? Comment? Okay. Comment over that.
Yeah, I guess a question, you mentioned projects that are already submitted, and I know some are still coming. Not sure if you're at liberty to confirm or deny if these have already been submitted, but it seems like stacking functions of solar panels on schools would make so much sense that, you know, it's like taxpayer money that's paying for the school's electricity. So if we put them on the schools, that's going to save taxpayer money down the road. It just seems like everybody wins. Do you know if any of those types of projects have been submitted for Northwest Indiana so far?
I know they were mentioned in a number of public meetings, which is definitely what helped contribute to us adding this measure. But defer to Scott, I don't know if you're able to say.
Sure, we don't have a project sponsor that was specific to just Northwest Indiana, but we have multiple project sponsors for both schools and churches statewide that are intended to focus solely on low-income and disadvantaged communities. And those types of projects, they don't identify exactly where their projects will be implemented, but in order for them to be competitive, they would have to be in the low-income and disadvantaged communities, because that's going to be a very heavy weighted criteria in how projects get prioritized.
Any more comments?
Yes, thank you for holding these public meetings. The following are my recommendations from your list of possible actions. So under forest preservation and restoration, I want to say the Briaries Woods and the Hespel neighborhood of the city of Hammond is under threat of development from the mayor. It's old growth forest on the last remnant of sand dune, part of the tallest glacial moraine that formed as the ancient precursor of Lake Michigan, retreated. It's within walking distance of homes and apartment buildings, and provides a forest and natural habitat for residents who otherwise may not be able to enjoy one in a neighborhood that qualifies as an environmental justice area. Under wetland preservation and restoration, the assault on wetlands that we have in our state is dangerous and misguided. The benefits of wetlands to purify rainwater and mitigate flooding is well known, apparently to everyone except our Indiana state legislators. Let's protect and restore them for our future benefit. Expand community solar. Community solar can benefit residents who aren't able to afford or for other reasons can't benefit from rooftop solar. And this is another environmental justice issue. Conserve undeveloped lands, again, Briaries Woods, bulldozing natural areas in the name of economic progress is really no longer viable. And we must start to respect our natural world. Expand anaerobic digesters to improve methane capture capacity? No. Confined animal feeding operations, CAFOs, must not be encouraged by allowing them to reduce GHG emissions simply by using technology. The way to stop emissions, not to mention the smell from lagoons where waste is collected and the animal cruelty that abounds in these operations,
is to stop them. Under hydrogen hub, I asked that hydrogen, if it's to be produced to lower emissions in steelmaking and other large manufacturing processes, be confined to green hydrogen. That is hydrogen produced by renewables. And that'll have a much greater effect in lowering emissions than using natural gas or other fossil fuels. I come from Northwest Indiana, an area of the state where pollution has taken a great toll on all of us, and especially those who live close to the refinery and the steel mills. And I asked Adam to create a pollution reduction plan that also reduces particulate matter emissions and ozone precursors, such as volatile organic compounds. Thank you.
If you wouldn't mind, would you be willing to share a copy of how this works? Thank you so much.
I have a question. You said you'd received 20% of your recommendations came from disadvantaged communities, but there were no project sponsors in Northwest Indiana. Can you distinguish between projects that have been recommended and project sponsors?
Absolutely. So the stat regarding 20% representation from priority communities, that was in our survey respondents, the ones who helped us select what large categories and measures, those broad categories, including renewable energy, energy efficiency, et cetera. So 20% survey respondents from priority areas. When it comes to those who have submitted projects, we do have some from Northwest Indiana, yes, on that slide, and we had a number listed. So yes, there is some representation from Northwest Indiana. We're still receiving projects, so we do not have a map currently of how many come from low-income and disadvantaged communities in particular. So one was a survey response to help inform the plan, and the other is projects for implementation. The verdict is still out on projects for implementation. And
the community-based solar project was located right here in Gary, sponsored by a nonprofit. We've had, I would say, a very fair share of the total applications that came in for Northwest Indiana and focused on low-income and disadvantaged communities. And then the statewide applications, although they have statewide applicability, with their need to focus on the low-income disadvantaged communities, there would be a proportionate benefit specific to Northwest Indiana too, because those projects would need to be implemented where the benefits are needed the most. The other benefit that we're looking at from a co-benefit perspective, from a project selection criteria perspective, is the co-benefit. So when you talk about ozone and PM 2.5, Northwest Indiana is really the area of the state that benefits the most from there. So the weighting criteria really do benefit Northwest Indiana more than the other portions of the state from a competition standpoint on the statewide projects and other investments. But yeah, there's been a really great turnout and response on project sponsorship for projects specific to Gary as well as Northwest Indiana as a region.
I guess I misunderstood what you said before, because I thought you said there were no project sponsors from Northwest.
That was just for solar for schools, specific to schools. We didn't receive a rooftop solar for school project specific to Northwest Indiana. It was a statewide project for schools.
Thank you.
Sure. The one for churches is from a nonprofit organization out of Chicago, and it was for targeted communities that included Northwest Indiana. So those were the two projects the two applications that I mentioned that weren't just specific to Northwest Indiana, but had a statewide flavor that included Northwest Indiana. You're welcome.
So following up on that a little bit, if there was an area that was identified as an area of concern and something that you identified as a project priority, and yet you don't get proposal related to that, is there a step that IDEM is going to take to fill that gap to make sure our priorities are being reflected in the implementation grant?
That's a really good question, and it is a concern that we have because there are gaps among the measures as well as on geographic applicability of some of the measures. And one of the opportunities that we have in competing for the 4.6 billion is applying as a state, as a sole applicant. The other is to join multiple states as part of a collaborative to compete for funding as well for specific and individual measures. So we are exploring the opportunity of taking 2 bites out of the apple and trying to fill those gaps by participating in those alliances to see if we might be able to fill those gaps. One of the critical ones that really is applicable to Northwest Indiana is on the industrial process side. And that's where we didn't have a whole lot of applications from that perspective. So we are in communication with states that are looking to join into sponsoring a program where you don't identify the projects on the front end, but you identify a pot of money to be made available competitively to implement those projects by working directly with the industries and targeted communities. So, we haven't made formal decisions with regard to which of the collaboratives we are going to join, but we are still in the process of exploring them. In fact, Susan and Jessica, another staff member of ours, just spent 2 days in Austin, Texas, communicating with all of the other states on these opportunities. We had a call this morning with the state of Michigan over one just specific to Midwest states.
And if I could follow up, and that would be one of my big concerns with Gary, is if our leaders don't ask for it, we don't get it.
Right.
And so what can be done to sort of force our leadership to understand this is a lot of money when it comes to the environment. And you have high pollution, you have cancer rates, your children have high asthma rates. Can you all sort of get our school corporation, our mayor, our county government to just sit down and just recognize even with dumping? That's a huge problem here. And those dump sites are like illegal landfills.
Right.
But if our leaders don't write it, it can't get funded. So what do you all think you can do to help encourage them? I'll put it that way, encourage them.
There are a number of initiatives outside of the climate pollution reduction grant. I know that our commissioner talks about the illegal dumping and communicates with local officials all the time about that. It's not a problem that's easy to solve, as many problems are difficult to solve, but there are communications that are underway and collaborative efforts to try and address some of those longstanding problems. It's not something as part of this process that we're going to be able to solve. We're really focused on implementing projects that benefit communities. Way I like to talk about this program is that when our agency is dealing with communities, it's usually from the not in my backyard perspective. What we're trying to do here is what most people want to see happen in their backyard. We want to be able to do things that are providing relief of the burden that exists.
Schools and churches have been mentioned as applicants or potential applicants. Have any of the local colleges or universities applied for grants?
University of Indiana as well as Purdue University have applied, and the University of Indiana did include projects specific to the Northwest campus,
Yes.
which would be clean energy related projects.
Just those two?
Those were the only 2 educational institutions, yes. There was also a branch of Indiana University, the Environmental Resiliency Institute, that has applied for projects that would be statewide. Those include education and outreach and an energy program. And they had a third one that doesn't come to mind, but they were statewide. Purdue's were very specific to their Lafayette campus.
Well, I just wanted to ask, there's several ideas have been kicked around that sound similar to the multi-state collaboration of a pot of money for a certain type of projects, but you don't have them lined up or the program lined up 100% yet. Is that something you would entertain? I just didn't seem like it would score that well.
I'm sorry, we're looking at submitting an individual state application
Yeah.
and competing within one of the tiers. We're also exploring the opportunity of participating in a multi-state application that would compete independent of the state application.
Right. I was meaning with the intake process for projects in Indiana, accept projects like that that are kind of vague still.
Right. The collaborative are going to be pots of money.
Yeah.
And then you would do a competitive solicitation to
Yeah.
compete for projects for that, not after the grant is awarded.
And within a very specific area, the
But
collaborative.
so I'm the region, and could I apply to the state to be in the state proposal to get a pot of money to do a request for proposals up here for diesel?
So let's say.
That's just an example.
Yeah, right. So.
But I don't know who would do it yet, because there's no time to put something like that.
No,
Okay.
you don't need to worry about it, Kathy. The way it would work is if Indiana joins 5 other states on a control measure and those states get awarded, once we receive the award in the fall, we would do a competitive solicitation for projects at that time.
Okay.
The grant application doesn't include the scope of projects to be funded. It just includes the nature of how the funds will be used. So the projects would then be selected in 2025 based on the competitive nature of them. And they would be across the states receiving that. So an area like Northwest Indiana is going to be more competitive for a project sponsored on behalf of Indiana in that collaborative than many of the other states.
Okay, so there's not really a percentage in creating a mini one of those here if you're doing that. Okay, thank you.
Really quick, thank you for doing this and coming to the region IDEM. What you said about the multi-state potential collaborative around industrial decarb was really interesting. I hadn't heard that from anyone else. I know some NGOs in the room are working on some of the industrial decarb stuff as well as us. If it's helpful to, as you're evaluating which multi-state collaborative to potentially join, I'm sure we're talking to a lot of the same folks that are either in those collaboratives or working with people in those collaboratives, RMI series, there's a North American Clean Steel Coalition, Industrious Labs, like the list goes on and on. So if it's helpful to do a more deep dive community engagement on some of those pieces, because the technologies are still emerging and all that, I think a lot of us in the room would be happy to pursue that in the future, because obviously the industrial pollution is no joke in this area. So thanks.
Thank you. Well, I'm thankful of ATV and Gary. I've been in Gary a long time. Grew up here. I'm going good. It's a driving city. Beautiful. It goes time. I talk to many people that it's dead city. Beautiful. Some years, 2 weeks ago, they said there are 10 beautiful cities in the U.S. Gary at the top of the beautiful city. No, they shouldn't be that way. I don't know what to say about them growing up. But everybody's so power, piggy, great, windmill, diamond. I've seen down south in there, great, in open field. But in the city, it'd be an eyesore for people. I took a picture of that where good about this up close. People are, when you start looking at it in a microscope. But as people, don't mean nothing. It really don't mean it's so powerful that as people engage trying to find ways to get food on the table. Kids going to school and problems. People want to look for jobs in Gary. We need jobs, the top party. You go in Crown Point, Fairfield, they'll accept that. There's prosperity there. But I'm saying that every, I don't give a attitude, they don't look at this, they go real world is struggling, trying to find, look for a decent place to stay, job, things. You know, I just, I mean, there's a lot of disparity in the city. I mean, so many people get it. It's disparity. So many now. The poll in 2017, the past 10 years, 50,000 people now, Gary. 50,000. That's sad. You know, that's a nice city. People afraid to walk the streets. I walk the streets. Now I'm refusing to fear. Where is she? Cops. There are no cops around. Where the cops are? They're probably somewhere around. But I want to say, it's a great idea, but we start thinking about it. It's a struggle. Deal with the people, as people in the Gary. You know, that's think about them, because they need help really bad. It's a dying need. It's a crisis. No, y'all tell me. I'm so about somebody wonderful when it's crime porn. Thing like that, it's wonderful. It's prosperous. It's prosperous. But I Jerry, they need help. That's all. They follow that. Follow the people. Every guy. Okay. Thank you.
I'd just like to say, in terms of addressing industrial issues through trying to utilize some of these funds to address the industrial sector. This is an environmental justice community, for Northwest Indiana along the lakefront here, these communities of Whitingham and East Chicago and Gary. We come to the permit hearings, which is another area that IDEM has control over, and we talk about environmental justice issues, and IDEM responds to us that they do not have a policy to address environmental justice issues within the permitting process. And yet at the same time, that is pretty much what controls the level of air pollutants, water pollutants, land pollutants that we have. So the question is, can you utilize this potential money coming from climate reduction to address industrial pollution in a different way that says we have environmental justice issues here? What can we do that is outside the permitting process that is often stated as being something that doesn't allow, at least in IDEM's position, to address the problems with environmental justice? So can we look at climate reduction and get industry to reduce some of the pollution that is apparently not able to be controlled through the permitting process through the climate reduction money? Because how will we ever not be an environmental justice community here if we cannot control the pollution through the air permitting process? So I'd like to see you go above and beyond. I'd like to see IDEM have their own environmental justice policy that says we have to look at this, the inequalities and the disenfranchisement of the people of Northwest Indiana who suffer more pollution. We have to find a way to change that. Thank you.
I want to take a minute to respond to both the immediate speaker and also the speaker before. Just very impacted by what you said and needed a minute to think about it. So just want to acknowledge that, yes, this grant program isn't able to solve some of the more fundamental issues experienced in Gary, Indiana in particular, and just appreciate the expression and the acknowledgement, the significance of those challenges. It could be very small, but it would still be lovely to see, the additional job creation that maybe bringing renewables here could have, or additional training. So especially acknowledging the potential that jobs can bring. And maybe it's a small drop in the bucket, but it would be nice to see some of those benefits brought here. So just want to acknowledge what was stated. And then most recent speaker, want to just highlight this as an opportunity. As we've been mentioning, the focus on specific communities and priority communities is absolutely one of the ways that these programs and these projects submitted are being prioritized. So it absolutely is a criterion in how these money and funds, how the application is put together, which projects are included, and eventually how the funds are dispersed. So just want to acknowledge that, yes, this is a key opportunity to focus on areas impacted by pollution and both greenhouse gases, but also some of the local air pollutants, the criteria and hazardous air pollutants as well. So just want to acknowledge that, yes, this is an opportunity. We'd love to see its impacts.
Yeah, that prioritization too is at both levels, the federal level as well as the state level. So the way that EPA is going to be selecting the applicants for funding is going to be prioritized based on low-income disadvantaged community benefits. And the way that we are going to be prioritizing projects is going to involve the same. So that's in the way the program is being set up. In order to be competitive, you better have your act together and make sure that you have your priorities straight, because if you aren't targeting your benefits to the communities that need the relief the most, you're not going to be competitive and you're not likely going to get funding. So it's unfortunately we don't have control over what applications we receive, but we have done our best to reach out to the entities, including the Office of Sustainability here in Gary, to find out who are the key players, what projects are most important from your plan, who else do we need to talk to, and also through collaborative processes to evaluate how we can find those benefits. We have other air quality challenges too that we're going to have to get additional relief for this area, both ozone and particulate matter, where the standard is going to be lowered here within the next month or two. So those reductions have to be achieved. And once they're achieved, the benefits are going to be very specific to these communities. And quite frankly, because this is where the emissions are deriving, that's where the reductions are going to have to come from.
I just want to thank you for what I heard tonight. And I want to stay focused that the state of Indiana doesn't lose this money, because I see too many times we get money. So we definitely want to partner. And I think a lot of people in the room, Lois is over the African American Chamber for the Northwest Indiana, and she writes a lot of grants and does things. And what I heard is we have to take an initiative. So we got to take initiative and then partner with you. You're our partner. And we got to get this money. And we got to get this money to fix things. We can't talk and get in. Well, like you said, committee chairman rejected that. Now you can't get the money. Can't get the money. You close the schools. We can't do that stuff. This is important. You got the money. The president has approved it. The governor's backing it. We got to work as partners. So we may need some coaching. We may not quite write it right. And if Lois gets with you, you see these names coming from Northwest Indiana, you need to help us so we together make that package the way you like it, so we can get that money for Indiana, because it's going to help your job and it's going to help our community and all these people in this room, because they need a little help. And, they're not getting a break in their taxes. They need a little help. So whatever programs we can do to put money in people's houses to, I call, reduce the footprint, the green, let's make it happen. We don't want Indiana to lose this money to Illinois, to New York, to California. We want Indiana clean. We want people going to want to come here anyway. We got to clean this water. We just got to clean it up a little bit. Okay, that's all I'm saying. So it's going to take us. It's not nobody else's problem. Somebody got to take initiative. Everybody's waiting on somebody else. Lois, you know what we got to do. I mean, if we submit for all your money, I might submit for all of it, and we only get a little bit, but at least we got something. I might go for all of it. I'm not leaving no money on the table.
Hi, this has been a great meeting. I'm confused on a number of points though. This is my first meeting of, I guess, this is the fourth meeting you said? Okay, I haven't been to any of the previous ones, and I'm just a little bit blurry on the structure and process of the whole overall program. So there's a pot of money, $4.6 billion, that you're applying for that amount of money, or that's the plan, to come to Indiana. And other states are gonna get equal sized pots of money. Is that right?
It's a competitive program. so-
Only one state wins?
No. They'll give it out. There's a number of awards. I don't know if it's exactly at different levels that will be awarded to states and different quantities of money. So the EPA has already said, we're gonna give 10 states $3 million. We're gonna give 15 states, $20 million. So they've already broken out the number of awards they'll give, and all the states are submitting their applications to compete for those different awards.
What's the 4.6 billion?
The total pot.
Ah, got it, okay.
Right. There's 46 states total, plus an additional,
I don't know.
12 or 13 municipal entities. So large cities like Chicago and Indianapolis, cities above 1 million in population, also receive planning grants and are also going to be competing for that same pot.
Okay.
So that 4.6 is extremely competitive.
Right, and
So-
a small amount of money.
Yeah, right. 4.6 billion is a lot of money, but when you're looking at splitting it up among that number of entities,
Right.
you've really got to have your act together, and the cream of the crop is going to rise to the top, and that's the only thing that gets funded.
I know
And
that.
it's an all or nothing grant program too. So
Say more about that, what do you mean?
we apply for $199 million. We either get 199 million or we get zero.
Okay, yeah, right. So the time for submitting proposals is over.
It's the deadline for the part 1 portion of the intake form was January 15th. The deadline for the second part of the form is February 15th. If we get projects in by February 15th that are going to benefit this Northwest Indiana community, they will be included as part of the full program consideration.
Okay. These programs, you've gotten more than 100 of them, proposals, and there's going to be a review committee looking at them and saying, this one, and the other is going to go as part of our application for our part of the $4.6 billion. You're going to select which ones make Indiana look the most competitive.
It's a 2-stage process. One, we have to decide, there's 3 decisions to be made. One is for a state-only application, which tier do we want to compete in? The higher money you ask for, the fewer awards they're going to be.
Mm-hmm.
So we're looking at the middle tiers rather than the upper tier to increase the likelihood of securing funding. That is going to dictate based on how many projects we get, how much we need to reduce it down to fit in that tier. Then the third decision point, the other decision point is going to be, do we participate in a multi-state effort in addition to the individual application in order to compete for other funding through a multi-state opportunity?
So it's not either or.
No,
You can do both.
We can do both.
And you could get both.
And we could get both, or we
Okay.
could only get one or the other.
Right.
So,
Or neither.
right, and there are a lot of considerations. We want to be careful in evaluating the impact of joining a state collaborative and to determine whether it decreases our likelihood of getting a state application funded.
Right.
So, because for the state collaboratives, they're individual measures. So, if we get funded and we get to fund that individual measure in Indiana as part of the collaborative, and that's the only thing that gets funded, everything else that we are looking at across the state doesn't. So we want to make sure that we're balancing.
This is like 3-dimensional chess.
It is. But once we determine, how much we're going to apply for and how much we have in applications, we're going to be using criteria that's based on cost effectiveness, co-benefits, and the impact to low-income and disadvantaged community. Those 3 are going to be the weighted criteria. Projects get scored. It's not, is this one in or is this one out? You're just scoring them all, and the bright line is where your funding runs out. Everything that's above the line would be included because that's the cream that rose to the top. Everything else is going to be considered for future opportunities, because part of our priority and comprehensive action plan includes an obligation for us to commit to continuing to explore opportunities to fund those measures, even if we don't get enough money or no money to fund what we want to fund out of our plan for this 4.6. We'll continue to work with entities to find ways to implement those opportunities as they arise.
Okay, one more question. The group of people that reviews these is IDEM internal, is that right? Or does it include community stakeholders?
It's going to include IDEM staff, and we also have an interagency work group that involves professionals from other state agencies like Department of Natural Resources, Department of Health, Department of Energy Development, so that, you know, the experts that have more understanding of the areas associated with the specific measures, Department of Transportation too, are able to provide their expertise in helping us evaluate.
And they need to be short-term projects, not short-term projects, but projects that are somewhat shovel-ready, you know, because the EPA is looking to give the funds availability October of this year. And so, you know, there's a lot of really good projects out there, but if they take a lot of planning, they're not doable for sort of quick reductions.
Right, and two, any projects that are included have to align with one of the 10 measures that Amanda went over tonight. That's one of the prerequisites is that any measure that's included in your grant application for consideration has to align with your priority climate action plan. So we have received applications for projects that are outside the scope of those 10 measures. So those types of projects wouldn't move forward in the scoring process.
I had a question as far as, we're looking at underserved environmental justice communities. So we know with Gary, I say we're like in a time warp. This is the city that US still built and designed. So technically, if there was a huge investment in infrastructure where people had the sidewalks, they had the lighting, that hits the category. But my concern would be with IDEM, if you recognize poverty is high, people need to get to the business districts. I was driving down Broadway and I saw a young man and it looked, maybe his son walking. So you're walking, then there's no sidewalk. Then you're walking again, and then there's no sidewalk. So when we start looking at the infrastructure, if people were able to walk around safely, and we look at the traffic accidents, our fatalities with traffic accidents, they've been like doubled to the point where I'm like, it's a health crisis because it's just not safe for people to walk. So my concern is when we're getting to issues in environmental justice communities that are underserved, that you have high poverty, when there's an opportunity to say, hey, we got to repave these streets. We got to make sure sidewalks are all over so people can walk around and aren't dependent on vehicles. Will IDEM be willing to say, hey, this meets the category, even if it's 100 million, to put in new sidewalks, to address flooding issues, reduce traffic? I'm just concerned that people don't become antagonistic towards Gary, where on one hand we say we want to help, but on the other hand, we really can't help. People don't want to submit that application to do 100 million for new roads and sidewalks. So I would just like to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, for projects that can be funded, have to result in greenhouse gas emission reductions. There are infrastructure improvement projects that can result in greenhouse gas reductions. That includes bicycle and pedestrian facilities. So if your current sidewalk system is not really accessible for pedestrians, and you know, any kind of infrastructure improvement would improve accessibility for pedestrians, then it would be eligible. The same thing for, you know, green spaces and bicycle paths and things of that sort. But repaving roads, that's not something that is eligible. But something that I will point out is that the infrastructure the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, does include other pots of money for other entities to also look at reducing the impacts of climate change. One of those pots is for the Department of Transportation. And so the Indiana Department of Transportation also is in the process of developing a climate action plan that's going to include measures specific on the transportation side. So there are multiple initiatives to address concerns across the country and in the state. So it's important to keep up with all of those. And that's part of why we have, all of the agencies that we're working with. The Office of Energy Development too has a lot of investment opportunities through the IRA for investing in alternative energy like solar as well.
I do want to highlight that we have about 10 minutes before 7:30 cutoff. So if you have questions, this is a good time to get it out.
I think that we had a hand up over here earlier.
No, it's okay, thank you. My name is Kyle Lissick, I'm with Drive Clean Indiana. I was very interested in the industrial carbonization discussion a little bit earlier, but all I have to say is submit your projects. They're not gonna be included unless they're submitted. So if you need help, I can give you my card. We've submitted a bunch of projects. We're from St. John, but we work locally. We work across the state of Indiana and across kind of the country, but if you don't submit your projects, they're not gonna get funded. So you gotta make sure they're included. Thank you.
And second point to add to that is you can reach out at any time via the CPRG email address for questions as you're pulling together applications. So if you're running across anything in the form doesn't make sense or you want a second opinion, please do reach out.
Do we have a show of hands, just how many people here are representing governmental agencies versus NGOs or nonprofits, just to get a feeling for who's participating?
Yeah, if everyone's willing.
All right. Can I get hand raises for if you're representing a governmental agency? All right. FEMA speaking out, which one?
I'm the Northwestern Indiana Planning Commission.
Okay, perfect. And then what about NGOs? All right.
Drive Clean Indiana Legacy Environmental.
Okay, perfect.
Gary Advocates for Responsible Development.
Anybody else with a hand up? Okay. All right. Can you say a little bit louder? Okay. All right, and then, okay, sorry. All right, and I'm guessing everybody else is just here as individuals and concerned citizens, correct? Oh, okay.
Faith Farms and Orchards, Gary, and Faith CDC.
All right. Any last minute question? I think we have room for just one more. All right. I want to pass it back to Amanda to go ahead and close this out for you.
Amanda, I got a question. On slide 9, it was like a scoring criteria. Was that your guys' actual updated MREL scoring criteria? Or was that just a general? Sorry.
Yeah, let's, actually, maybe I can wrap us up and then we can chat quickly as we go back to slide 9.
You represent just yourself.
Oh, yeah, that was NREL's, energy savings potential across states. I can get you going if you're interested. It was eye-opening. So yeah, seeing 25% energy savings in Indiana as a potential.
They look very similar to project selection criteria and weighting criteria, but those were the factors that weighed into the analysis.
Yes, yes. So part of the technical analyses that the EPA is requiring. Awesome. Well, again, just thank you everyone so much for coming out tonight. for attending, for your attention and your participation. Again, hope this is the start of a much longer engagement, especially because as soon as we get this application in, we will continue with comprehensive planning. Really could benefit from everyone's participation. So thank you so much, and we'll be around for any last comments or questions you might have. Take care. Safe.